Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra nuggets and juicy tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. This is half about what I'm doing right now, and half of it will be what I had left over from yesterday that was too long to give you yesterday. So there's a whole section on demining and whatnot that I'll tack on to the end of this. But let's get started. Let's go to another war translated video. I referenced this morning in my news piece. We are people, not meat, mobilized from the Kaliningrad, Murmansk, and Arkhangelsk regions. Complained that the intimidation of the command They also stated that they use weapons from the 1940s, including mortars and guns. They're being threatened with punitive measures. Okay, what do they say? I'm just going to read out the subtitles and not play it. We are the mobilized from those places. Currently, we are in a military unit of the 5th Motorized Brigade named the Zakharchenko. Our regiment was previously in the Kaliningrad Oblast. We are appealing to Commander-in-Chief Putin. We're not provided with strategy and tactics. We're being sent into assaults. There is no cooperation with commanders. Fire support is lacking. There are no means of night and day surveillance. We're lacking armored vehicles and artillery support ahead of the assault. Weapons from the 1940s are used, including mortars and guns. There are no written combat orders. We are not an assault unit. We were prepared for territorial defense, and in our first assault 6 people died in one trench. We are asking you to pay rigorous attention to the preparation of the assault by the brigade, including when the mobilized unit used not being prepared for these, when the mobilized troops being used are not prepared for these tasks. We're asking you to urgently take measures, as punitive measures against us are already being prepared. We are threatened with being locked in cellars, have one-on-one discussions, and finding rioters. We have no rioters. This is the opinion of each individual. We are all 30 to 40-year-olds. We have families and children and higher education. Some have 2 educations, and we will sign under every word. We do not refuse to complete the combat objective. We're ready to go. We ask you to pay attention to this situation. We're using old combat vehicles. People die for nothing. People are sent into frontal attacks, sent into an empty field during daylight in the 21st century. We're asking you urgently to take measures. This info will go into all Telegram channels and media. Because we can't fight like that, and we won't achieve victory with minor casualties. Meanwhile, on other fronts, they do not spare vehicles and artillery, but preserve personnel. Completely opposite happens here. I always find these quite interesting. So it's the last part is, we are not meat. We are ready to fight with dignity, not as meat in frontal attacks. This is not to say that, hey, the war's a bad idea and we're fed up with that. It's just like, we'll go to war, we'll do the fighting, but just give us. And that list of what they said, what he said was wrong, was basically everything. I was like, literally, the war thing that we're supposed to be doing. Well, all the components of that. Well, they're all really shite, and we're complaining. Like, literally everything that we're being asked to do, and everything we're being given, and all the commands, and everything about this war thing is bollocks. Please sort this out. So this is a really damning indictment of the Russian state of affairs when it comes to doing war. Now, I've read you that Kiev Independent article, or parts of it, that suggest that things aren't as perfect as one might imagine with the Ukrainian forces, and I've explained why that might be. But I think that's a category change from what is going on here, which is just a fundamental issue with the Russian armed forces, and that is. Although they say in other places they've got it right, it appears that they don't actually have it right in many places, and in fact, this is endemic in the armed forces of Russia. Okay, I was talking about how the sort of situation Russia are in, and they're getting out 50-year-old, 60-year-old BTRs, these APCs. They're putting naval turrets on top of these APCs. They are dusting off really old T-62 tanks, so on and so forth. They are in trouble. And it seems like Bakhmut is exhausting them. You get lots of pro-Russian voices saying, Bakhmut's going to fall, how wonderful Russia is, but they are expending such an amount of troops that you wonder whether they will have any energy to do anything else going forward. What have Ukraine been doing? Well, sending reinforcements in who are poorly trained because they need a stopgap to kind of bide their time for the counteroffensive to come to fruition, and that requires training, getting the equipment to Ukraine, and so on and so forth, and getting all those logistics routes sorted. But it's just worth reminding you guys how much stuff is due to come. Like, I think we forget sometimes. So we get wrapped up in, say, Bakhmut, and oh, Bakhmut, Bakhmut, Bakhmut. I think Ukraine are doing quite a clever thing here, which is, as I've said several times, fix the Russians in Bakhmut, get them to attrit increasingly elite forces like the VDV and a proper Wagner trained mercenaries. Uh, Fix the forces by having good solid defense up in Kremina, attrit forces in Vuhledar, fix in Avdivka and Mariinka, and just get them to use up and lose a bunch of stuff. All the while, you have tens of thousands of people being trained on a whole bunch of stuff. So here's a list, an outdated list. I mean, this is from, goodness me, like a month and a bit ago, right? And this was some of the suggested tanks. There may be more of these tanks now. I haven't gone through this list to look, but you've got a whole bunch of tanks coming. Some of these might not turn up, like the Abrams might be next year. Okay, but nonetheless, you've got a whole bunch of very capable tanks coming. All of these tanks, all of them, I'm pretty sure, will have tech on board that will give them a competitive advantage over the tanks that the Russians are using. If not, they'll be parallel. So you have a whole bunch of better equipment being sent to the front lines, arguably at once for a big or couple of big counteroffensives. And you have tens of thousands. There was talk about three sets of 20,000 troops. So 60,000 troops, whole bunch of people trained up on this. Now, don't forget, these are just tanks. You have hundreds. Was it not like as many as 800 like vehicles set to come? Strikers, CV90s, which are infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, infantry fighting vehicles, um, and very capable ones. Bradleys, very capable ones. British Bulldogs, you've got some Spartans coming along. You've got Mastiffs, you've got AS90s, self-propelled howitzers. You've got Caesars. You've got a whole host of other things as well. Like, we are talking about hundreds and hundreds of vehicles here and thousands of people trained on them. I can only see this going one way. Russia are in trouble because they don't appear to be able to bring anything to the table, any game changers. There's possibly is one big gliding bomb that they can use now. That's a very significant piece of munition, but again, they need to release that from the air, from their airplanes, and it's contested airspace. But likewise, the Ukrainians have got JDAM ERs, as I talked to you about. So these gliding bombs they can drop that have 45-mile range, possibly with 2,000-pound bombs. That's significant. You start using them, and lots of evidence now that they've got these Vilka N, these gas. They have these little holes on the side that can shoot out gas that can get them to change direction slightly and GPS, and they have maybe up to 130 kilometer range rather than 84 kilometer range, 110 to 130, and they're working on a longer range version. So they're starting to make their own indigenous weaponry that has a competitive advantage over the Russians again. At least, the Russians claim to have like the Tornado, but we haven't really seen that be used. Uh, so it's not looking good for Russia. This war seems to be only going one way, given that it appears that Russia are now doing their offensives. Their offensives are happening now. Well, what are they doing? Where they succeeding? Oh, they're not really. Okay. So it's looking really problematic for the Russians. And then when you look at this is just a list of the anti the air defense system, sorry, that the Ukrainians are either have now or are getting or are due to get. And this is like the best air systems in the world and some, lower end stuff, but still really useful. Just fabulous change of situation for the Ukrainians. They they will have in 6 months' time just a completely different armed forces than they had previously. And I don't think Russia have any answer at the moment. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I being too optimistic for Ukraine? I can't see, if Russia had stuff to counter this, they would be using it. The question is, okay, if Russia got all these troops and pieces of equipment in some second echelon somewhere, why are they not being used? Like, all all of the rationale and all the evidence points to the fact that Russia at the have got nothing, and they're going to have to do a forced mobilization, and even that is just going to produce a bunch of boots on the ground, but is not going to be able to compete in terms of equipment and technology. It, of course, it is all about ammunition, and these vehicles are only as good as the ammunition they can fire, right? Uh, and the fuel and whatnot. So all of that needs to be in place. But assuming that that isn't a problem, then these counteroffensives are going to look really, really problematic for Russia. Anyway, on to the stuff that I recorded yesterday. Where should we go to first? Drones. And to be more precise, kamikaze drones, one-way drones, whatever you want to call them, and Russia's use of the Lancet drone in particular. So here's a defense blog, a very short piece. Russia's kamikaze drones demonstrate highly effective in Ukraine. They I've reported a number of times before how the Lancet is still a really significant thorn in the side of the Ukrainians. As a loitering munition, it has taken out a number of pieces of equipment. In fact, the OSINT uh, source Oryx, who's been counting up visually confirmed losses, said on March 4th, so that's only a couple of days ago, that at least 100 successful hits of the Russian kamikaze drones on Ukraine targets have been recorded. Um, and there are a number of different pieces of kit. Here's just one particular tweet you would see from Oryx, which is two M109 self-propelled guns, one destroyed, one damaged. And then saying more than 100 successful hits have been recorded. Most of those were achieved by the Lancet 3M. I mean, not all of them, but the Lancet is a major problem and still is. The piece goes on to say kamikaze drones have become a real headache for Ukrainian troops and inciting fear into the minds of artillery crews, which have become the main target for Russian drones because the drone is guided to the target using tactical reconnaissance such as Orlan 30 or Zala. It is very difficult to detect the approaching Lancet or Kub in advance, and it is also challenging to jam the radio control channel because at the final stage it is already controlled by an inertial system. Okay, let's unpick that a little bit. Basically, we are starting to see these nets that are put over SPGs and other pieces of equipment to protect from particularly the Lancet, so that they, instead of these drones hitting the hard surface of the SPG, for example, they will get caught up in a net that is suspended above the piece of equipment. But these are difficult to jam. They have an inertial guidance system. What does that mean? Well, there are lots of ways to guide things like drones, and some of these ways are particularly susceptible to uh, electronic warfare. So you can jam a radio signal that is being used, and the drone will drop out the sky. That kind of thing. So imagine you've got a remote controlled drone that you are controlling from a distance. You get that jammed, it falls out the sky because the connection between you and the thing seems to have been stopped. This is how I understand it. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So with the Lancet, during the last part of their of their journey, when they're going towards the target and going in for the hit, they are using an inertial system. What is an inertial system? An inertial measurement unit is an electronic device that measures and reports a body's specific force, angular rate, and sometimes the orientation of the body. In other words, where it is in space, using a combination of accelerometers, gyroscopes, and sometimes magnetometers. When the magnetometer is included, IMUs are referred to as IMMUs. Okay, whoop-de-doo. So an IMU allows a GPS receiver to work when GPS signals are unavailable, such as in tunnels, inside buildings, or when electronic interference is present. That's your key there. So it works by detecting linear acceleration using one or more accelerometers and all the kind of stuff that I've just mentioned. Typical configurations contain one accelerometer, a gyro, and magnetometer per axis for each of the three principal axes: pitch, roll, and yaw. So there you go. These things allow something like a drone in this case to, and there's a pitch, yaw, and roll, to be able to navigate themselves towards the target without being jammed. So it's kind of like a self-contained, how I understand it, it's like a self-contained navigational unit on board. Even GPS can be quite difficult to jam as well. So I won't go into the ins and outs, other than to say that Lancers are difficult to easily defend against. The only thing, I guess, going for the defenders is that Lancets don't seem to be hugely powerful. There's been a number of Lancets that we've seen that have hit, say, a howitzer and just given it a punctured tire. You've got to hit it in the right place, but then you hit it in the right place, you can get some cooking off of munitions and really substantial damage. Okay, keeping on a drone, I showed you this footage the other day. This is a rarely seen Russian Kronstadt Orion unmanned combat aerial vehicle, UCAV, returning to the base following a combat mission over Ukraine. Now, the reason these are rare, these are supposed to be coming into service with the Russians in 2023. Orion can carry up to 4 guided bombs, the maximum payload of 200 kilograms. It has been operated by the Russian armed forces since 2019. Well, it depends which one you're talking about. That one was an Inokodets RU, as far as I understand it, according to another source. And these are the ones that have been tested as of August 2022 and due to enter service into 2023. So this could be the reason why that's rare, is that particular one isn't really been used before. These have, the general characteristics. They can go 200 kilometers an hour, which is 120 miles an hour, max speed, cruise speed of 120 kilometers an hour, 75 miles an hour, range of 1,440 kilometers or 890 miles. So these are that they can go for 24 hours with a payload of 60 kilograms. Obviously, the more you put on it, the range will be, I would assume, limited. This Inokodets RU can take up to 450 kilograms. This is a substantial piece of kit, and somewhat similar to the kind of Bayraktar style of drone. If Russia are using these, then they are starting to get their hands on more capable aerial equipment. Of course, as the second greatest army in the world, you would have expected these to be, embedded in the Russian forces already. We don't seem to see much of an equivalent for the Russians of something like the Reaper drone for the Americans that were tried and tested. There are some of these drones, as you can see here. There are different variants of, for example, the Orion. It's just, they don't appear to be in great numbers in the Russian forces. It's a bit like the T-14 Armata. Brilliant, well done. You've developed this new tank. There's 20 prototypes hanging around. Where are they in the front lines? Okay, they're not there. They're behind schedule. All that money's been frittered away because of corruption, so on and so forth. So same old problems. But anyway, that is a thought that might be of interest to you. Sorry, I had to take a tea break there. Don't want to get a cold. Moving on. Here, we're going to move on to mines. Now, I don't know whether this is a result of mine, but I'm just going to give you a scenario which I think comes out of looking at a piece of equipment, a piece of footage like this. So this is a Russian convoy of, it looks like, thanks for that, troops. And it seems like the first vehicle has been fundamentally hit. The reason why I think this is this is as a result of a mine is because these other trucks have stopped and everyone just gets out rather calmly. They're not running for cover. They don't think that there's like artillery going off, so on and so forth. So I think this is probably an example of a mine. But the power of mine activity is that this, first of all, this vehicle at front might well have been a truck with troops in, has been completely destroyed, and one assumes everyone in there or everything in there has been sort of destroyed and taken out of future use. But not only that, these two trucks have also stopped and their troops have got out, and then they're wondering what to do. They're also, it appears to be, dealing with injured soldiers as well. They're moving away. I don't know. Maybe it is artillery, maybe it's not. But imagine it is mines. This is the importance of mines. Is that whatever these guys were supposed to be doing, whatever mission they were on, they're now no longer doing that, and they are at least somewhat somewhat delayed in doing what they were originally going to be doing. And moving away, it needs to sort that out, get the deminers in, or whatever, if it was indeed mines. So I've talked to you about this before, the importance of mines. This war, I think, is really, really showing how incredibly powerful mines are. So especially since you can go out and lay different types of mines, you can have sort of mines that trigger off basically an ATGM effectively, like an anti-tank guided missile or a miniature version thereof. So something like the Palm, a German Palm mine, you trigger, and that can be triggered off with noise, vibrations, whatever, and you can set it so a car wouldn't set it off, but a tank would, that kind of thing. You get quite a lot of technological mines. You get jumping mines that can jump up and then come down, a bit like a sort of javelin type mechanism that will explode on something from above. And then you get your bog standard mines and mines that you can fire up from howitzers and litter the landscape with. It's just incredible the variety of these that you can get. And someone like Vuhledar, where they have just covered entire areas of mines, it properly inhibits the Russians in this case from doing any meaningful offensive. They do the offensive. It doesn't stop them doing the offensive. They appear to still keep doing these offensives and then dying. What it does is it stops them succeeding. They die and they are losing huge amounts of equipment. So mines are massively important. But the problem is, and this will be the same for the. I wonder whether the Ukrainian offensives will they're going to be given have been given all this amazing equipment that they're going to throw into these two massive counteroffensives. But if you're the Russians, you'll be like, well, what have we learned from Vuhledar? Okay, mines. Just mine the heck out of everywhere. And those at counteroffensives are going to struggle. So not only are they dealing with trenches, revetments, dragon teeth, barbed wire, all this whatever, all this stuff, which are, that's not nothing. They're also dealing with several echelons at least of mines, and that is going to really cause them a problem. But then, of course, it's considering, well, what happens afterwards? What happens in places like Kharkiv that have been liberated and now are covered in mines? What happens to Ukraine for decades after the war ends? Now, here's a very interesting. Drat and blast! It's accidentally highlighted everything. Bear with me 2 ticks. So this article in Euromaidan Press is really worth reading. Invisible Heroes: How Deminers in Ukraine Tackle Dangerous Fields on Liberated Lands. And let's pick out a few salient paragraphs from here. Each day on a walk to their current worksite, Alexander Ponomarenko and his team from Halo Trust. So this is an organization outside of the national organization that's working on getting rid of mines. He walks past a tree with shreds of clothing hanging from its upper branches. The shreds are what remains of a jacket worn by a member of the State Emergency Service who was killed last spring deactivating a landmine at the tree's base. And there it is, just a constant reminder. And this has, of course, been an issue in Ukraine since the war began in 2014, but is obviously vastly more problematic now. In addition to the government state emergency services, the SNS, demining teams from international organizations like Halo Trust have constantly been working to clear these often hidden threats. Despite the dedication and courage of these demining teams, the scale of the problem remains, in many ways, overwhelming, emphasizing a need for more dedicated resources. The Russian forces briefly occupied the area that they're working on here. So this is farmland near Brovary. They briefly occupied the area from the 14th to the 30th of March. So they're only there for 2 weeks, right? And yet the Ukrainians are still demining this area during their failed attempt to capture Kyiv. Uh, 3 people have already been killed in this particular stretch of farmland termed Velika Demirka Site 1 and 4 by Halo Trust. On March the 12th, 2 civilians died when their car struck an anti-tank mine, launching chunks of metal radially outwards and leaving pieces of car seats and clothing in the trees above. On the 4th of April, obviously this is last year, a member of DSNS was killed while removing a mine. Russian forces had buried a second mine underneath the one originally identified. So imagine how horrific that is. You think, right, I found this mine. You successfully deactivate and remove the mine, and that itself triggers off a second mine underneath it. It's terrible. Um, uh, so on and so forth. Considering the danger inherent in this type of work, the safety of each member of the 9-person team is given absolute priority, which, while necessary, also means that clearing land can be a months-long process, particularly in dense tree lines like those at Velika Demirka. 8 to 12 square meters are cleared per person per day. Just think how much of a small area that is for a single person to have to clear, and then consider the size of Ukraine, or at least the size of the area of the land where the Russians have been. It's phenomenal. For people living locally, time is not always a luxury they can afford. Farmers still work the land bordering the worksite, harvesting cabbage and apples despite the risk. So there have been a number of farmers who have died, particularly up in the Kharkiv Oblast. A lot of locals and farmers, have been the collateral damage for these mines. Deminers from the DSNS work in formerly occupied territories of Kyiv, Chernihiv, Donetsk, Mykolaiv, and Sumy oblasts. To meet the increasing need, their numbers were increased by 400 people in May, and the total number being more than 1,000. An additional 500 deminers are in the process of being trained and deployed. I'm going to take a quick sidestep here to show you the list of military aid to Ukraine during the Russia-Ukrainian war. This is a Wikipedia page I showed you the other day, but it also gives a few indications of at least some of the demining assistance that are being given by other nations. So I'm going to do, as is always very useful, I'm going to put demon into Control F and look for all the places in this page where that appears. So we have Cambodia. On January the 16th, 2023, 15 Ukrainian deminers arrived in Cambodia to receive training in removing landmines. Cambodian demining experts will also travel to Poland to train Ukrainians. So they've obviously got a lot of experience of demining in Cambodia after Vietnam War. On the 23rd of May last year, Colombian Defense Minister announced that a team of 11 demining engineers of the National Army of Colombia will travel to an unspecified NATO country to train their Ukrainian counterparts in landmine removal. And then we got Ireland. 30 Irish soldiers will participate in training of Ukrainian armed forces in demining. We have 10 Mitsubishi L200s for demining operations being given by Lithuania. We have 98 Polish police officers participated in demining in Ukrainian territory from summer 2022 for 5 months. And then Ukrainian soldiers, so this is Portugal, have also been trained by Portuguese in the inactivation of explosive devices. So there is a number of countries that are assisting Ukraine, and probably more than that as well, that are not detailed in that page. and that's really, really helpful. Since the start of the full-scale war, over 50 members of the DSNS, so that's a government demining, or the services that are providing demining, including deminers, have been killed. On December the 24th, 3 more were killed in Kherson Oblast, while another was killed on January the 4th in Izium during demining operations. Foreign governments have provided aid specifically for mining explosive clearance to support these efforts. In early August, the United States announced it would provide 89 million to support up to 100 demining teams in Ukraine. Halo Trust recently received 300,000 from the Scottish government, 2 million pounds from the UK government, and 7 million Norwegian kroner. It's about $700,000 from Norway. Germany has provided 6 million euros to Halo Trust since February 2022. Since the start of the new year, the UN has allocated $4 million for demining operations in Mykolaiv Oblast, while Canada has agreed to provide $5.6 million for demining to help coordinate these efforts. Prime Minister Shimal announced on February the 11th the establishment of the Ukraine Center for Humanitarian Demining, which will serve as Ukraine's centralized demining hub. How long it will take to clear liberated areas of unexploded munitions remains unclear. However, in May, the Ukrainian government estimated it could take 10 years to completely clear the country of landmines and unexploded ordnance once the war ends. I refer you back to Cambodia. It's been a long time since the Vietnam War. Okay, let's move from mines to mines. Let's stay on mines. Here is an MRAP, which is a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle whose job is to protect those inside from mines. This is a TM62M. The vehicle's armored capsule protected the lives here of 10 soldiers. So let's have a look. You can see the mine. I think one of the things that these vehicles do one of the design features is that they are higher off the ground, to therefore, there's more I guess space for the explosion to lose some energy and to spread out, so it doesn't all enter into one much smaller space if the chassis was much closer to the ground. But anyway, this and also some of them have V-shaped. Oh, I can't do that with my elbow. V-shaped your chassis underneath, or part of the vehicle underneath, to cause the explosion to sort of glance outwards. But anyway, that's an MRAP doing its job. Okay, now moving on to something very different, which is a Russian fashion show, second army in the world, anyone. So these are Russian POWs. And again, it's about concentrating on little things, I often say. Here we look at the variation of footwear for Russian soldiers. And you just see a huge variety, including, goodness me, just a pair of leather shoes you expect to go to work in, trainers, all sorts of different pieces of footwear. Just it just shows you that, yes, I'm going to be talking about how things have been tough for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut, but you look at the variety of not just footwear, but also even the trousers here. It doesn't. It's not a good reflection of conditions for the Russian army, particularly for the mobilized troops. Okay, let's have a look at a very important piece of equipment. These will be super important for the Ukrainian counteroffensives, because the NATO tanks that are being provided are much heavier than the T-72s, T-80s that the Ukrainians use at the moment. These will require really substantial bridge laying activities, forward of the offensives, and of course, talking about mining as well, demining, engineering vehicles, AEVs, armored engineering vehicles. Here we have an example of this. Is supposed to be south, I think, of Bakhmut, in the canal area, Kurdyamivka area, maybe. I don't know if it definitely is, but it doesn't look like these guys are under too much threat here, so who knows. But here is how this particular bridge laying vehicle works. So there's your canal by the looks of it, and Here is how it lays it. Very important. If you're an army that's trying to get from the left-hand side of the picture to the right, uh, your tanks will get a bit stuck here, and your troops won't be happy with having to cross that, by getting in it and crawling up and down it. So bridges are obviously incredibly important. Do the Russians have enough of these vehicles? Do the Ukrainians have enough of these vehicles? This is a question. I mean, there have been some claims that the Russians are lacking in a lot of the support vehicles like this. They appear to be lacking in decent tanks themselves. So one would assume that that would be the same for these kind of engineering vehicles as well. Anyway, that is one being set up. Just gives you an indication. You don't always get to see stuff like this. There's a lot of footage of tanks blowing up, slightly less footage of a vehicle laying a bridge. So the excitement of that can only be found here, right? Or something. I don't know. Anyway, there's a couple of bridges now for the as I said, those NATO tanks, some of the real actual concrete bridges and whatnot aren't strong enough apparently to withhold these 70-ton tanks that might well be passing over them.